Thank you. Very kind. So we were just watching, those of you who are watching, or at least listening and seeing, there was one of 4 tuberculosis TB shorts that Ulmer did in the 1940s. This one was shot at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Another one was shot on the Navajo Nation, aimed at the Navajo community. Another one aimed at Mexican Americans, and the other one, the fourth, at the broader public. I mentioned the stint at Producers Releasing Corporation when I was talking about Detour. And as we move on tonight to Ruthless, I thought I'd say just a few words about Ulmer's career after he left PRC. He worked on 2 films with Hedy Lamarr, the second of which was filmed during his European stage of productions. It's one of the only films on which Ulmer stormed off the set and quit. But A Strange Woman, which is a great noir with Hedy Lamarr, produced by a couple refugee producers from MGM, came soon after Detour. But the G-Men showed up on King's Road, where the Ulmer family lived, and he was questioned about his political leanings. And Shirley tells the story that after they came, they gave him a number of forms that he was to fill out. I wasn't quite naming names, but he asked about his different collaborators. Ulmer allegedly, according to his wife Shirley, script supervisor and lifelong collaborator, ripped up those documents, and they made their way to Europe. In Europe, starting in the late 1940s. So after the HUAC here, immediately after, he directed I Pirati di Capri, Pirates of Capri, an Italian swashbuckler, a nice sword and sandals picture called Hannibal with Victor Mature. I mentioned The Love of Three Queens. That was a Hedy Lamarr film on which Ulmer became so utterly frustrated, apoplectic, really, that he stormed off. And then Ulmer came back to the States and shot a nudie, The Naked Venus. It wouldn't even get a PG rating today. A couple back-to-back films on a hangar in Dallas, Texas. This is really the high point in motion picture history. The Amazing Transparent Man and Beyond the Time Barrier. Doesn't get much better than that. But lots of films that really only the hardcore sci-fi buffs or B-movie buffs would really know. He ended his career with The Cavern, filmed in Yugoslavia, very, very difficult film with John Ahern and Saxon, I'm blanking on his name. I think he's also with John. But anyway, with a relatively seasoned American cast, actually an international cast, and it was not long after The Cavern, a film that was released in 1964, that Ulmer suffered from a number of strokes. That's when Peter Bogdanovich finally got to him and did a 3-part interview. Ulmer had already, as I said, suffered from those strokes, and his memory was not terrific, to such a degree that the great Lotte Eisner, whose book The Haunted Screen is one of the trailblazing films that chronicle German cinema between the wars, she called him the greatest liar in the history of motion pictures. Got to give Lotte Eisner some credit. Let me turn to Ruthless. And I mentioned to you about Detour that suspicion of money is really quite prominent in Al Roberts's, so Tom Neal's voiceover narration. It's also figures with equal prominence in Goldsmith's novel. I mentioned in passing that Goldsmith had financed that novel by piling people into a Buick station wagon at $25 a head and driving them from New York to LA. So he'd actually gone through a journey like that himself. As for the Jewishness, not only of the novel, but also what's left more in kind of, it's almost what Andre Aciman said about Casablanca. He says that Jews are all over the screen, but nowhere in the picture. Well, the same is there's sort of a structural absence, and the same might be said of Detour, in the sense that you have this kind of displaced person in Al Roberts, who's stripped of his identity, loses his name, loses his bearings, clearly coming to terms with trauma. And Ulmer himself had lost family members in the Shoah. So I'm going to speak about Ruthless, and I have about maybe 5 to 7 minutes, I think. I hope I didn't time myself. I don't do that anymore. But I'm going to read from the written text next. I'm going to, in the wake of that cataract surgery, just one eye down, I'm going to need to pull out these reading glasses one more. I'm just getting used to it. I still think that I'm wearing glasses. But with my left eye, I've got almost 20/20, and if I close like this, you look fabulous. So here we go. In the spring of 1948, around the time that Ulmer seemed to be hitting his stride as an independent director, he released another gritty, dark little picture called Ruthless. Based on Dayton Stoddart's source novel Prelude to Night from '45, from the same year that Detour was released, a work of somewhat greater literary ambition and historical sweep than your average dime store pulp, Ruthless has come to be known as Ulmer's Citizen Kane in miniature. And like other Ulmer cheapies, this one was done as Jim Hoberman, who teaches here in the department, as Jim Hoberman is sardonically quipped, for the equivalent of Orson Welles' dinner allowance. Framed by two low-key brooding flashbacks typical of film noir, Ruthless presents a world-weary view of American capitalism and runaway greed that reflects the basic tenets of Welles's masterpiece on a considerably smaller scale. As Ulmer explains to Bogdanovich in that 3-part interview I just referenced moments ago in 1970, the complete, these are Ulmer's words now, the complete evilness and ruthlessness about money, that's what I wanted to do. Produced by a small outfit called Producing Artists Incorporated, headed by Arthur Lyons and released by Eagle Lion Films, the successor company to PRC, Ruthless belongs to a small coterie of B-noirs with uncommon flair and production values of an A-class picture. Featuring the big studio talent of Austin's native son. I need to say that, especially when I'm Austin. If I'm introducing Detour at the Austin Film Society, Linklater's baby, the theater, I always have to mention that Zachary Scott is a native son of Austin. So Austin's native son, Zachary, and then Sidney Greenstreet as well, a native of Sandwich, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Both, or I think you probably say Sandwich now, Rob. Is it Sandwich? And you say, I have to say Sandwich because it gets a laugh, but yeah, I do. Both on loan out from Warner Brothers, the storyline takes shape around the dramatic rise and fall of Horace Vendick, the character played by Zachary Scott, a man who craves and ultimately captures all that others have. Born into modest means and raised by an unloving mother, Vendick systematically turns his back on his early inclinations toward benevolence, including a heroic feat of saving a childhood girlfriend, Martha Burnside, and the older Martha is played by Diana Lynn in the film, from drowning. Vendick rots from the inside out as he gains further access to the hallowed halls of affluence, first to Martha's upper crust family, then Harvard, then other well-connected families, and on to Wall Street and beyond, acquiring a boundless appetite for power and leaving in his wake a host of jilted lovers and money men. Though more of a Bildungsroman, tracking the rise and fall of Horace Vendick set against an expansive historical backdrop than a snappy pulp a la Detour, Stoddart's Prelude to Night showcases all the core ingredients, vice, trickery, sex, and the full catalog of human vulnerabilities. Stories of this kind, observes Jeffrey O'Brien in his Hard-Boiled America, tell of a dark world below the placid surface, a world whose inhabitants tend to be grasping, dissatisfied, emotionally twisted creatures. This other America, when it is not a bleak rural wasteland inhabited by murderous primitives, is a glittering hell ruled by money and violence, flaunting images of beauty that are neither deceptive or unobtainable. Those are all Jeffrey O'Brien's words. Like their cinematic counterparts, these novels frequently plumb the depths of the American underbelly. Cheap, sensational, devoid of scruples, they are meant for consumption while on the move. Like the adaptation of Detour, which required the taming of some of the less restrained depictions of vice, not to mention the stripping of all recognizable Jewish traits, Ruthless similarly had to make amends with respect to the steamier passages of Stoddard's novel, rendering them less objectionable on the screen. And I'll just say quickly about the Jewish characters. There's a Saul Neff in the novel, as well as Sanford Lot. You have cameos by the titans of industry, as Ann Douglas spoke of them last night, the Warner Brothers, Irving Thalberg, I'm missing at least one other. Oh, and Carl Laemmle. But it was really the tamping down of the sexual elements that the production code picked up on, because the Jewish elements were already completely stripped from the script. Here we go. There we go. One character in particular, in terms of the production code now, very quickly. One character in particular, Krista Mansfield, whose portrayal in the novel is of a woman dripping with sex, had to be tamped down in the film. Though not generally beholden to the hard-boiled idiom of the day, Stoddard relents in his depiction of Krista. I quote quickly from the novel here. She could undress faster than a fireman could slide down a pole at the old engine house around the corner. Just a little taste of the novel. In Ulmer's rendition, Lucille Bremer, a former contract actor at MGM who played opposite Judy Garland in Meet Me in St. Louis, and who, during her teens, danced as a Radio City Rockette, endows Krista with notable sex appeal, but also with greater subtlety and without the nudity suggested in the novel. Given the code restrictions, that would not have been possible. In fact, Joseph Breen puts it in his memorandum of October 23rd, 1947, in a canned line that he'd use in a later, for one of Ulmer's later noirs, Murder Is My Beat, with Barbara Payton. And the quote from Breen's memo is exactly the same. I quote it here. The production code makes it mandatory that the intimate parts of the body, specifically the breasts of women, be fully covered at all times. Any compromise with this regulation will compel us to withhold approval of your picture. End quote from Joseph Ignatius Breen. Bremer's Krista has some of the same sexual knowingness of Anne Savage's Vera, whom we just saw in Detour, but as in the case of Vera, her eroticism tends to percolate beneath the surface. Similarly, she possesses an uncanny ability to see through the sexual schemes of others. And I quote it once more from the novel. From the first day you weren't kissing me, she tells Vendig, you were kissing 48% of Delta Bond and Cher. End quote. Not long after the film's theatrical release in mid-April 1948, critics from the industry trades and the popular press were divided over its message and over the portrayal of its unsavory protagonist, again Zachary Scott as Horace Vendig. In an advance review from The Hollywood Reporter, an unnamed critic praised the verite qualities of the film, suggesting it had, and I quote, borrowed its plot freely from Wall Street history, and the events depicted had been plucked from yesteryear's headlines. End quote. Several months later, Philip K. Scheuer of the Los Angeles Times highlighted, and I quote again, the strong and effective climaxes of the film, and that, he goes on to say, Edgar G. Ulmer, in his old-fashioned but all-out direction, has dealt with tellingly. Scheuer also paid special tribute to the performance of all three female characters, from whom, as he puts it, Ulmer has drawn emotional responses unsuspected until now. In marked contrast, the New York Times called the film, and I quote, a long, tedious recital about how a poor lad worked his way up the Wall Street ladder in the fabulous 20s, brutally trampling over friend and foe, end quote. The main fault of the film, the reviewer argued, lay in the problem that, and I quote again from the Times piece, it is impossible to become concerned about a character so patently fabricated, a character so cruelly cold and inhuman that he assumes a degree of monstrousness unrelated to reality. So much from the New York Times. What the critic of the Times was presumably unaware of is at the time of his writing, was that the film's viciously anti-capitalist narrative, adapted from Stoddard's novel, had been co-written by two blacklisted screenwriters, both of whom Jewish. Alva Bessi, uncredited at the time, and Hungarian boy Gordon Kahn, both of whom had been summoned to testify before Congress the same year that the film was in production. A veteran of the Spanish Civil War, Bessi was forced to serve time in prison for refusing to confirm or deny party membership, while Kahn eventually fled to Mexico. No doubt Bessi and Kahn, and to their left-leaning writing partner S.K. Lauren, the charges of monstrousness and cruelty seemed like an accurate representation of the byways of money and power. Ruthless is less concerned with the portrait of an unscrupulous megalomaniac, comments Randall Humphreys more recently, than with the portrayal of a system where money is paramount and the people irrelevant except as pawns to move around the board to win ever more financial gains in the name of ever-increasing profit. Owing to its subjective undercurrent, the film has been owing to its subversive undercurrent, the film has been placed alongside the neglected gems of the Hollywood left. With its politically savvy script full of Abraham Polanski-style bon mots. Indeed, Stoddard's novel has its own share of bon mots. The narrator remarks at the close of a central chapter, and I quote again from Stoddard, "A dollar is, as everyone knows, the scariest thing on earth." Or even more self-consciously, Vendig's partner at Pan American, Sanford Lott, talks of his writers trying to slip in the Russian angle, as it's put in the novel. Over the years, Ruthless has not lost any of its timeliness. Indeed, the core issues that Ulmer tackles have not disappeared in our age, nor have there such characters as Vendig. Writing on his Talking Pictures blog, Chicago Tribune film critic Michael Phillips devoted a series of poignant reflections to the recently restored print of Ruthless, touring the country as part of UCLA's 2009 Festival of Preservation. With the Madoff scandal, the financial meltdown, and Michael Moore's latest filmic intervention still fresh in his memory, Phillips writes, and I quote, "Ulmer may as well have titled his 1948 opus, Capitalism, a Love Story." It is no less than a stinging critique of unchecked American greed and the rapaciousness of a personality type very much in our collective experience today. It is almost too darkly ironic, too prescient in the wake of the colossal bank bailout of 2009, that a line from Stoddard's novel, when Vendig and a business partner are trying to secure venture capital, reads as follows, and I quote, "Try Goldman Sachs, they'll try almost anything." Ruthless may have never had as much piercing resonance, not even in its own day. Enjoy the show.